Hello, Tom Maguire. I have a review of a fantastic, really worthwhile book today. It's Earl Charles Spencer's memoir called A Very Private School. It's about his days at Maidwell. And I really wasn't too sure what to expect from this book. I kind of saw that it was by Charles Spencer and I thought, happy to admit, I kind of thought, is it going to be a bit boring? I had no idea the sort of stuff he'd been through. I knew nothing about Maidwell. I recently read Harry's book, which I've done a review on. We'll say no more about that in this review. But this is just the sort of memoir that grips you from beginning to end. It made me feel anxious at times. It made me feel sad towards the end. I actually teared up and felt like crying at one point. And although it's obviously non-fiction, the storytelling is just absolutely fantastic. It's almost like a parallel world. And I think it's really important that people read this sort of thing or listen to it in order to get a bit of an idea of how people of his background, of his generation, actually lived. And to some degree, how those sorts of people in high society still live today to a degree. I think it's very easy to assume that these people who have all this money and this privilege, they're spoilt, they're lucky, they're not very resilient, they don't know they're born, etc, etc, etc. And to some degree there is an argument for that, isn't there? Of course there is. They don't necessarily live the same lives that we do. They don't necessarily have the same kind of hardships that we do. But on the other side of that, and I have said this before on this channel, on the other side of that, with that privilege and wealth comes a hell of a lot of hard-heartedness and duty and having to be quite cold and to struggle in relationships. Really, in a lot of the things that we, the more normal people, kind of take for granted. Wouldn't it be great to have all that money and power, but also have a whole load of freedom as well? It doesn't really work like that though, does it? Money gives you a certain amount of power and control, but it also can take away some of your freedom. And I think someone like Charles Spencer is a perfect example of that. I don't want to give too many spoilers in this review, but there may be some. So if you're really concerned about reading it without having any spoilers, then, feel free to end here. But he basically talks about the absolutely hideous abuse that went on at Maidwell when he was there as a child. I think he started at 7 or 8 years old. And he talks about how horrendous it was being taken away from his parents and his home, and then being put in this place where all of a sudden, yes, you're with a load of other boys, same age and older, of course, and you're all in some ways in the same boat, but to not have your parents there, to not have that comfort, to not have that encouragement. And the stories he tells of some of the teachers were just absolutely hideous. Real sadistic, evil people. And I've said before, if you think that there isn't evil in the world, I hate to sort of insult anyone, but I think that probably makes you quite naive. You either haven't experienced it firsthand, or you've not read about it, or you've not thought deeply about it. But there are certainly things that go on in the world that are absolutely evil. We don't even need to get into the current wars that are going on at the minute, the wars in history that have gone on, genocide, etc, etc, etc. But the actual human cruelty that goes on and went on at Maidwell just sends a shiver down your spine. And I don't want to say this book is really good, because good isn't really the word to describe something as horrible as this in some ways. And I remember describing Schindler's List to my mum years ago as being a good film, which she quickly turned around and said, well, I wouldn't call it a good film. And what she meant by that was that, it's obviously an absolutely horrendous subject matter. So to call it good just doesn't seem appropriate somehow. But aside from that, it is just a really good book. It's a really good memoir. I found it really interesting, and it was enjoyable to listen to be fair. I know we sort of have our slightly sick dark side, don't we? We want to know what sort of journey people are going through, and when we hear this sadistic behaviour, we want to know where it ends and what happens. And I was hoping at one point that Charles Spencer was going to grow up and find, his abusers in their care home, all frail, and do a bit of bullying back, as horrible as that sounds, because you just feel as though vengeance is just something that sort of builds up, and yeah, it's hideous. But by the time you get to the end of the book, you kind of hear him talking about how people got older and died, and he started talking to his old friends and trying to talk to their parents to explain how bad it was, and no one knew about it. And some of the parents kind of said that, you know, it was what we did in those days. We sent the children away to where we'd been. We thought it was character building. We had no idea such abuse was going on. Some of them are in denial and just say, oh, well, don't be such a baby, you know, pull up your socks, get on with it kind of thing. And it's just another world that most of us are used to. But basically, just to summarise, I'm not going to go on for too long. I don't want to give too many spoilers. I've given a little bit there, but it's not really, it's still absolutely worth listening to or reading. Absolutely fantastic. I was really pleasantly surprised by this book. A Very Private School by Charles Spencer. Fantastic. Please keep liking and subscribing. Speak again soon. Cheers.